housing market is, of course, no better than it was 15 years ago. In fact, 15 years ago, it was actually a lot better. And because of high interest rates, the housing market has become even more unaffordable for ordinary Americans, and it has led to inflation both in residential homes that people seek to buy and also rentals. So let's get into the details on this. It all really dates back to the Obama administration and how the Obama administration responded to the housing crash of 2008. And I'll get to what I mean by that in just a moment, but first let's take a step back and take a look at the entirety of the housing market and why we're experiencing what is currently happening. So as was reported in The Atlantic, at this time 15 years ago, real estate agents had 2.2 million vacant housing units available to show prospective buyers. That number has dwindled and now sits at just 732,000, despite the country having added 30 million people to its population. So clearly there's a huge issue here with inventory. We need to build more housing. The population is growing, but the inventory of housing is dwindling. The Case-Shiller index of home prices sits near its highest ever inflation-adjusted level, according to the data here. And houses are unaffordable for middle-class families across the country. The monthly payment on a new home has increased by more than 50% in the past 3 years, as 30-year mortgage rates have climbed from less than 3% to nearly 8%. So the problem that we're experiencing is actually twofold. Think about what happened following the coronavirus pandemic and the shutdowns. As soon as that happened, of course, the government is concerned about the financial stability of ordinary people, especially the tens of millions of Americans who were laid off through no fault of their own. So they immediately kick into gear, think about policy that can provide some financial relief to people. And then you have the Federal Reserve, of course, this unelected body of individuals who decide what the interest rates are gonna be. Interest rates were already low when the coronavirus pandemic began. However, they hit rock bottom when the Federal Reserve decided to further lower the interest rates in order to make borrowing cheaper at a time when, again, tens of millions of Americans were laid off. Now that led to a huge problem, okay? Because what ended up happening is it became cheaper to take out a mortgage. A lot of people refinanced, and that ended up being a good financial outcome for them, because they got a lower interest rate for their mortgage. But a lot of first-time home buyers are like, why are we living in this super expensive city when we can actually buy a home with a super low mortgage interest rate in a far more affordable part of town, right? Or maybe we can move to the suburbs, maybe even a rural part of the country. We can work from home. We could totally do this. And so a lot of people who live in big cities, who are professionals, who had the means to put a down payment on a home, decided to move to more affordable parts of the country. But that also ended up increasing the value of housing in those parts of the country, right? So all of a sudden you're seeing inflation in housing in areas that were typically thought of as more affordable for people. Then what made the matter worse is the inflation was apparent, the Federal Reserve gets involved, and they decide we are going to now increase the interest rates and make borrowing far more expensive. So now you go from 3% interest rates to 7% interest rates. The cost of borrowing is a lot more. And the thought is the higher the interest rate, well, that means the price of housing is gonna come down. But that ain't gonna happen if you have a shortage of inventory. So that is what happened here, right? We weren't building more housing. Interest rates went up, which means borrowing in order to buy a home became far more costly. The value of the home shot up as well. And since we're not building additional housing, the prices of those homes are not going down because there's still too little supply, a lot of demand, and the cost of borrowing to buy whatever housing is available is even more expensive. So it's just this vicious cycle because clearly you need developers to develop more housing. You need them to build more housing. But guess what? They're not gonna do it because most developers need to borrow for the materials that they need to develop the housing. And so if the interest rates are high, they're not gonna take out those loans, they ain't gonna build those houses. At the same time, people who secured those low interest rates during the coronavirus pandemic aren't gonna move, because if they move, they need a new place to live. And if they're gonna buy a new home, that means they're gonna get locked into a much higher interest rate. So a lot of people who might wanna sell, a lot of people who might wanna move feel like they're stuck as a result. So that's the situation that we're dealing with right now, and it's absolutely devastating for people who need a place to live. And since that inflation in housing exists for individuals looking to buy a home, if you can't afford it, then you have no choice but to rent. And that led to additional demand for rentals. That also increases the price of rent. So as Annie Lowrey in The Atlantic writes, this is the uncomfortable equilibrium the market finds itself in today. Nobody's selling because nobody's buying. Nobody's buying because nobody's selling. Nobody can afford to sell. Nobody can afford to buy. Prices are high, mortgage costs are high, rents are high. And there's not a huge amount of rental inventory. Everyone's stuck and paying more than they want to. And so what exactly do families do if they really need to buy a home? Like what is the easiest way to buy a home in a situation like this? Well, as Lowrey notes, you'd have to buy in cash, which is insane, because even in, let's just take it in the context of Los Angeles, which I will admit is more expensive than most parts of the country. But nonetheless, even if you're talking about a working class community, let's talk about Reseda, California, which is where I grew up. That is a traditionally working class community. It was working class back then, it's working class now. Majority Latino community as well. Houses there, you're lucky if you come across an $800,000 home. That's how expensive housing has become. So the idea of paying for housing in cash is insane to me. It means that this housing crisis that we're experiencing is further growing this gap between the haves and have-nots. It's leading to more inequality, economically speaking. This spring, 2 out of every 3 buyers in Manhattan paid with cash. So if you can't take out a loan, if it's too costly for you, well then you're very unlikely to be able to buy a home, or you happen to be rich and you can just do it in cash. That's basically what's happening here. And unfortunately, as Lowrey notes, there is more pain to come. So as Daryl Fairweather, who's the chief economist over at Redfin, says, once mortgage rates drop, that will actually reactivate the housing market, leading to more demand. With a limited supply, that would only lead to higher prices because people would engage in bidding wars. And that is actually what we were experiencing prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic. It was hard to buy a home because there were bidding wars among those who were able to qualify for a low interest mortgage. And that also led to the price of homes going up because bidding wars naturally are gonna lead to higher prices or sale prices for these houses. And even though there's really no good news on housing in the near future, apparently there could be some good news down the road, long term. Many states and municipalities have passed laws to promote housing development in the past 3 years, easing zoning restrictions, allowing high rises near transit hubs, and preventing owners from stopping development to protect their own home's value. So that's all good news, but unfortunately it takes a while for those types of policies to really make an impact, for you to actually see the benefits of those types of policies. What could happen on a federal level is, if we had a functioning Congress that actually gave a damn about issues like this and wanted to work on behalf of the best interests of Americans, they might actually pass policies that would provide low interest loans to developers in order to incentivize them to build more housing. There are other ways to get around this and increase the inventory of housing while doing so. Another thing that municipalities should do, can do, is take a look at the inventory of vacant rental units and see how long they've been sitting there vacant. Landlords should be pressured to rent those vacant units. And so in LA, this didn't pass, unfortunately. It just kind of fell through the cracks and they never brought it up again. But several years ago, the city council was thinking about implementing additional taxes against landlords who just aren't renting their empty apartments. They just sit there for whatever reason. Maybe they don't want to lower the rental price and attract, possible tenants. Who knows? Maybe they don't want to do the additional improvements before they rent to someone. But offering either incentives to these landlords or disincentives toward keeping them empty could also be a solution. But there are other big picture issues as well, including foreign investment in residential real estate, which I think should be banned for the time being. I'm not saying it should be banned forever, but at least for the time being, if we have a housing shortage, we shouldn't have wealthy people living in other countries, no interest in living here, but they're looking for a place to park their money. There's a lot of that kind of investment happening. That should stop. We should stop private equity firms from buying up residential properties as an investment. Housing should be maintained and saved for ordinary people looking for a place to live. But the biggest problem that I see here is that there doesn't really seem to be any will among those who are elected as public servants to do a damn thing about this. We've been talking about Israel a lot. We've been talking about the military funding that Biden proposed, $106 billion. The House passed that easily. It hasn't passed in the Senate yet. But I bring that up because whenever it comes to military funding that typically gets funneled to private businesses, defense contractors, little debate. I mean, the housing crisis doesn't even appear to be on their radar. And that should tell you something about who they feel they need to serve here. Definitely is not us.
Thanks for watching. If you become a member, you get to watch all this ad-free, except for, of course, this ad. Still, hit the join button below.